time on freedom. I'm Mikhail Baranov in the studio, and I'll tell you about the important news this Tuesday. Yeah? Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is visiting Spain. This is the third EU country the Ukrainian head of state has visited in the past few days. Like France and Greece, Spain is also ready to strengthen its defense support for Ukraine to help repel Russian aggression. And this year, Madrid will allocate €1 billion for these purposes.
This amount will include both the purchase of weapons in the U.S. for Ukraine under the Pearl program, as well as expenses for other equipment, such as generators, to mitigate the effects of Russian attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure ahead of winter. In addition, Spain is providing other types of assistance. For example, the country has taken in 250,000 Ukrainian refugees, including 40,000 children. Spain has long-term commitments regarding the sovereignty and defense of Ukraine and will continue to uphold them. José Manuel Alvarez, Spain's Minister of Foreign Affairs, in a comment to Spanish media. Our
special correspondent for Freedom TV in Europe, Vitaly Sizov, will give a detailed report on the program and goals of the Ukrainian president's visit to Spain. He is with us live and ready to share information. Colleague, good afternoon. Please, the floor is yours. Tell us the details of the Ukrainian president's visit to Madrid.
Good afternoon, Mikhail. Right now, I am at the official residence of Spain's Prime Minister, Pedro Sánchez, Moncloa. And here, Pedro Sánchez will be receiving the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, and possibly after this meeting, they themselves will share what they managed to agree on. Announcing his visit to Spain, the President of Ukraine said he was working to ensure that new agreements would strengthen Ukraine's defense capabilities. We have a quote from the Privatet. Today is a meeting in Spain that we have been preparing for a long time, and we hope that another strong country will help even more, protect lives, and bring the end of the war closer. We are working so that the meeting with Spanish Prime Minister Sánchez results in agreements that will give us more strength. Every day in our relations with partners must bring results for Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, President of Ukraine, on Telegram.
As part of his visit to Madrid, the President of Ukraine has already met with Spanish arms and military equipment manufacturers and held talks with the country's defense minister, Margarita Robles. The Ukrainian president noted that his country is interested in a partnership with Spain, and he discussed the main directions for further cooperation.
Spanish arms manufacturers presented their developments: anti-drone systems, turrets, aerial and ground UAVs, long-range detection radars, and munitions. It talked about their production capabilities, as well as the possible uses of the weapons and their technical specifications. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, President of Ukraine, on Telegram.
The morning began for the Ukrainian delegation with a visit to the Spanish parliament, where the Ukrainian leader was welcomed by the head of the Congress of Deputies, Francina Armengol, and the head of the Senate, Pedro Roland. Volodymyr Zelenskyy told them about the situation at the front, Russian attacks against civilians, and Ukraine's energy sector, and that Ukraine needs to strengthen its air defense with additional systems and missiles. And the missiles for them. They also discussed the PR program, which is a NATO-led initiative for purchasing American weapons for Ukraine, and the SAFE program, which aims to stimulate military production within the European Union. They also talked about extending the humanitarian and energy assistance that Spain is already providing to Ukraine, as well as support for the process of European integration. The Ukrainian president thanked both chambers of parliament for supporting Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty, as well as for all the decisions made in support of Ukraine. And finally, I'd like to add that Spain is located quite far from the eastern flank of the European Union. Usually, the most active countries, when it comes to supporting Ukraine, it's typically the eastern flank for obvious reasons, as well as the northern countries. Sometimes within the European Union, there is some restrained criticism from these countries directed at countries like Italy and Spain, saying that support for Ukraine could be greater. And we can see from these newly announced amounts of financial and military aid that the situation in this area, things are changing, and Spain is a good example. It's becoming more and more obvious that the Russian threat is real, even for countries that are quite far from Russia. And I'd like to emphasize again that it's generally pretty hard to convince Spain to spend more on defense. Even within NATO, there have often been calls and criticism from others about this. Even the President of the United States, including Donald Trump, has pointed out that Spain doesn't want to spend 5% of its GDP on supporting its defense. But this visit shows that the situation is really changing, and Spain's support for Ukraine is increasing. Thank you, Vitali, for your work and for the up-to-date information at this hour about the program and goals of the Ukrainian president's visit to Spain, reported by Freedom TV channel special correspondent in Europe, Vitali Sizov. He was live with us from Madrid.
In addition, Volodymyr Zelenskyy announced his upcoming visit to Turkey. He'll be there as soon as tomorrow. The Ukrainian president emphasized that the main topic of the talks will be bringing the war to an end. We will discuss this in more detail with our guest a bit later, but for now, let's move on to other current news. A 17-year-old girl was killed as a result of a Russian strike on Berestyn in the Kharkiv region. According to local authorities, the victim died in the hospital from severe injuries. A total of 10 people are known to have been injured, including one child. Rescue workers are continuing their efforts at the site of the shelling. In addition, the occupiers in the Kharkiv region attacked the village of Kutovka with drones. A local resident was injured there, and a farm building was damaged. 2 elderly people were killed as a result of the attack on the Chernihiv region. Around midnight, the Russian Federation struck the Hardyanska community with drones. According to local authorities, residential houses were damaged and the building of a non-operational enterprise was destroyed. Rescue workers have already extinguished the fires. As a result of the massive attack on Dnipro, 2 people were injured. Fires broke out in several districts of the city. Residential buildings and transport infrastructure were damaged. The building of a TV channel was almost completely destroyed, and cars were burned. The city was under drone attacks for about 2 hours last night. Natalia Husak will tell us about the aftermath and recovery efforts.
I was sleeping. Just lift this up. I was sleeping right here. Look. And the first explosion, and I was hit by glass. But the blanket saved me a little. This is what they did.
The night before, Vladimir was woken up by explosions. He says they were so close that the house kept shaking. He immediately went down to the basement where a bomb shelter is set up. All his neighbors were already there.
And then there were more than 10. That's how many I counted. But the woman said 11. Someone else said 13. The shrapnel was right in the yard, lying here.
Alexandra was also at home when the explosions happened. She says they only had time to get into the hallway. The nearest shelter was across the street, but it was too dangerous to cross. Everything outside was shaken from the drone explosions.
With the intervals, sometimes a minute, sometimes 40 seconds, sometimes 5 minutes. And, well, I personally counted 12, but others said they counted 16 or 17. All in one spot. They were falling in the same place, in Dnipro.
Alexandra and his daughter moved in the spring of 2024 from Ocheretyanova, Donetsk region. They rented an apartment here, and now there isn't a single intact window left in it.
Everything on that side was blown out. The curtains and curtain rods were ripped off, glass everywhere, total mess.
On the night of November 18th, Dnipro was attacked by more than 35 Russian strike drones. Most of them were shot down, but some caused fires in 4 districts of the city. 7 apartment buildings were damaged. At the moment, the information is that nearly 1,000 windows have been shattered. So far, 2 damaged roofs have already been confirmed. The building that suffered the most was the TV station. There were no people inside during the attack, but the equipment was almost completely destroyed. Yesterday, our driver managed to get into the editorial office on the first floor. Almost everything there was still intact. Recently, we went back in to try to salvage whatever things had survived. But everything is soaked with water and burned out, unfortunately. Our journalists and cameramen went into the control room. They managed to save a few cameras. We checked them, and they work. There is significant damage in the corridors. The building's also partially destroyed. An old double bass is the only thing we managed to save from the film studio, which was also located there. Had a large film set with decorations, props, costumes, and a lot of professional equipment. There's nothing left. The roof collapsed there. There's nothing even left to document. Everything burned down there. Just a hole. Because of the strong wind, the fire in the building was fought for more than 12 hours straight. Prosecutors and investigators were gathering evidence of yet another war crime committed by the Russian Federation. Prosecutors, together with investigators, are on the scene, inspecting the sites of the attack, collecting fragments of drones, and interviewing witnesses and victims of this massive assault. As a result of the Russian strikes, the transportation infrastructure was also damaged. It was reported in the morning that some trains would arrive in the city with delays. At this time, train routes have been redirected to ensure passenger safety. For Freedom TV Channel. Since the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russian army losses have already surpassed 1 million out of 160,000 people. This was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces in Ukraine. According to their data, just in the past day, 960 occupiers were eliminated at the front. In addition, defense forces destroyed 13 artillery pieces, a multiple-launch rocket system, nearly 300 operational tactical level drones, and more than 40 vehicles. More than 150 combat engagements were recorded on the front line in the past 24 hours. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, in the southern Slobozhansky direction, the Russians tried to advance on the positions of the defense forces 6 times. Ukrainian defenders repelled 7 enemy attacks on the northern Slobozhansky and Kursk sections of the front. The situation remains difficult on the Konstantinivka, Alexandrivka, and Huliopole bridgeheads, where the number of Russian assaults is in the dozens. The defense forces repelled the most attacks by the invaders in the Pokrovsk direction. And as military experts note, the armed forces of Ukraine continue to hold the defense right from Pokrovsk itself.
The Russians are now trying to push into the northern part of Pokrovsk as well, where they're met with gunfire. Accordingly, these groups appear and really do try, at least, to find loopholes and break through our defensive lines. But in fact, they're destroyed there. That's why the situation truly remains very difficult. This direction is really the hottest, because Donetsk region is the occupiers' dream, the one they want to realize in the near future. I want to remind you that the capture of Pokrovsk, the occupation of Pokrovsk by the Russians, was planned as far back as last year. In other words, the defensive operation currently being carried out by Ukraine's defense forces is yielding results.
We return to the main topic of the day. Volodymyr Zelenskyy has announced a series of important international meetings. Some of them will take place in Turkey, where the Ukrainian president will arrive for a visit tomorrow. As Zelenskyy stated on social media, the main goal of the trip is to intensify diplomatic processes, particularly negotiations to end the military aggression against Ukraine.
We are preparing to intensify negotiations, and we have developed solutions that we will propose to our partners. Bringing the end of the war closer by all possible means is Ukraine's top priority. We are also working to resume exchanges and the return of prisoners. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, president of Ukraine, on Telegram.
Russia's war against Ukraine is nearing its end, and Istanbul could become the venue for peace talks. This was stated by Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan. He emphasized that the confrontation between the two armies has now reached its worst point, where the military on both sides of the front can't advance. The Turkish diplomat also noted that he believes Kyiv and Moscow will eventually sit down at the negotiating table, and added that the Kremlin should consider the peace process.
I believe that this war is now going through its worst phase because both sides are focused on destroying each other's transportation and energy infrastructure. Now it has turned into a drone war. We believe that negotiations are inevitable. Personally, I think that talks will resume. Of course, we can't go into details. This could happen in Turkey or somewhere else, but I believe that peace will definitely come. Hakan Fidan, Turkey's Minister of Foreign Affairs, live on Aber TV channel.
Donald Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, will come to Turkey to meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. This was reported by Reuters, citing Turkish sources. According to journalists, Witkoff will join the planned talks of the Ukrainian leader. However, it is unknown what topics will be discussed at the meeting. Meanwhile, the Kremlin has stated that they will not participate in the Istanbul dialogue tomorrow. Putin's press secretary, Peskov, said that Moscow allegedly has not received any signals from Kyiv about a willingness to resume the peace process in Turkey.
Subscribe to The Gaze and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.